So a viewer pointed this out. He was talking about how Alexis de Tocqueville talked about the comparison between America and Russia as these two great powers. This is Alexis de Tocqueville. He wrote a book called Democracy in America, and that's what he is famous for. He was also famous for a quote that he didn't actually say, that you hear politicians repeat fairly often. They would say, America is great because America is good, and if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. And many people have falsely attributed that quote to de Tocqueville, but he didn't say that. But he said a lot of good stuff. It's one of those like classic books that everybody wants to have read, but nobody has actually read. It's that kind of thing. At any rate, they pointed out and they said, yeah, it's like the comparison between that de Tocqueville made between America and Russia. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm trying to remember that. So I went back into do a little research. Now, this article was published on September 5th, 2012. This was before Russia invaded. This was before the Maidan Revolution, and it was talking about. So it doesn't have an axe to grind in that sense, but it was just quoting Tocqueville. Tocqueville concluded the first two volumes of Democracy in America in 1835 with this prediction. Quote, today there are two great peoples on earth who, starting from different points, seem to advance toward the same goal. These are the Russians and the Anglo-Americans. Okay, well, let's see what else he has to say. All other peoples seem to have almost reached the limits drawn by nature and have nothing more to do except maintain themselves. But these two are growing. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you're German or you're French or whatever, that you're at the limits or whatever. I'm just trying to understand what Tocqueville was saying about Russia and America. And it's interesting that he chose these two peoples and why he chose these people and what he said are their obstacles and other things. Okay. He predicted, now there was only 15 million Americans at the time when he wrote. He predicted an American population at least 10 times as large, which the U.S. reached in 1950 and has since more than doubled again to more than 300 million. He commented, the American struggles against obstacles that nature opposes to him. The Russian is grappling with men. Let me read that again. The American struggles against obstacles that nature opposes to him. The Russians are grappling with men. So in America, they're trying to tame the wilderness, overcome these obstacles, and carve out their own destiny. The Russians are grappling with men. One combats the wilderness and barbarism. The other combats civilization clothed in all its arms. Wow, how about that? Consequently, the conquests of the American are made with the farmer's plow. Those of the Russian with the soldier's sword. Now, I've talked about this for a long time now, but there's something culturally about Russia that is very militaristic, very just like, I understand. People are going to accuse me on the other side and say, well, America, they're militaristic. See how many wars they've been in. But like wars of our own making? Not exactly. Like, what wars were we in? Let's go back and just start with World War I. We got kind of drawn into that conflict. World War II, we reluctantly came to that conflict. Korea, trying to stop the spread of communism. Vietnam, same thing. Afghanistan, we were sucker punched. So, yeah, there's wars, but it's not like invading Ukraine unnecessarily. I mean, there's a difference there. Invading Moldova, invading Ukraine before unnecessarily, invading Georgia. It's not the same. Okay, so again, the same line. Consequently, the conquests of the American are made with the farmer's plow. Those of the Russian with the soldier's sword. To reach his goal, the first relies, that's the American, relies on personal interest, and without directing them, allows the strength and reason of individuals to operate. We are a very individualistic culture. The second, in a way, concentrates all the power of society in one man. That's really interesting. I don't know how I've skipped that all these years, but that was really interesting. So Tocqueville concluded their point of departure is different, their paths are varied. Nonetheless, each of them seems called by a secret design of Providence to hold in its hand one day the destinies of half the world. Wow. Like that's a crazy quote by de Tocqueville. Now he goes in and talks about population and uses all these different charts to describe what's going on here because this is an academic publication. But there was another one here in April of 2022, Russia, America, and the Fate of Humanity, going from the same lines. This will sound familiar to reach his goal. The first relies on personal interest, right? The second on one man. And then they conclude this particular author says this: democracy suited America's purposes and autocracy Russia's. We're very different countries and we act very differently. And even when there's a pseudo democracy, the guise of democracy in Russia, it's really still autocracy. Tocqueville could not have seen that America and Russia would be squaring off over Ukraine almost 2 centuries later. Yeah, that would have been impossible. 1835 to 2023, you would have had no way of seeing that. But he wouldn't have been surprised that the great democracy of North America and the great autocracy of the Eurasian heartland remained sufficient strength and ambition to shake the world with this latest round of their competition. Like, it is interesting that he called these two as the big players that were going to be those that would continue to grow like they did. Vladimir Putin never accepted that Russia must resign itself to second-rate status. That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. So go back up a couple lines here. For a decade, at the end of the 20th century, Russia's strength and ambitions had seemed to be failing. It shed its inner and outer empires, Soviet Union, and the cordon of coerced allies in Eastern Europe, without even making a fight. But Vladimir Putin never accepted that Russia must resign itself to a second-rate status. And that's what happened. So, again, shedding these allies. These are why those countries, those allies that were coerced, this cordon of coerced allies in Eastern Europe, this is why Poland and Lithuania and the other Baltic states, and this is why these guys are so hawkish never to support Ukraine, to never let this happen again. Okay? And when Putin talks about how NATO is expanding towards them, it's not NATO expanding towards them. It's these countries seeking NATO's protection against Russia, who just has this kind of, they understand that Vladimir Putin never accepted that Russia must resign itself to a second-rate status, and they could be coming back again for them, and they don't want this. Okay, last little bit here. Putin misread the change in American attitudes just as many Americans misread the decline in Russian ambitions. Putin's invasion of Ukraine conjured fresh images in American minds of the Russian expansionism combated by U.S. policy during much of the 20th century and injected new life into American aspirations for world leadership. I think that line is telling because, like, most of my audience is in the 50 and up club. There's a few in 40 land and even fewer in the 30s and almost nobody in their 20s, according to my YouTube statistics. But if you're 50 and older, I'm 50. If you're, generally they're 60 or older, right? If you're in that club, you remember the Cold War. You remember what the Soviet Union was like. You remember the threat that they were. And it freshly came back to our minds of what could be and injected new life into the aspirations of American leadership that, yes, we can't just withdraw ourselves from the world. And this is where I call myself a Reagan conservative. This is where conservatives from that era and liberals from that era generally understand this is a problem that needs to be addressed. Okay, so that's it. Tell me what you think about this. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Put them in the comments below. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.